The date is October 27, 1944. The location: the outskirts of the Hurtgen Forest Western Front. The conditions: a brutal, suffocating fog clinging to the dense pines like a shroud. The war in Europe had seemingly entered a grinding phase of attrition. The euphoria of the breakout from Normandy was fading, replaced by the grim reality of seizing every German mile, often measured in bodies. Yet in the murky, desolate borderlands of the Ardennes, where the Americans and the remnants of the Wehrmacht played a lethal game of hide-and-seek, a discovery was about to be made that would momentarily stop the war for one small, hardened unit. It was Sergeant Michael Mick Rooney, a 23-year-old infantry veteran from Boston, who first heard the sound. Not the familiar scream of an incoming mortar, nor the distant hollow echo of machine gun fire, but a weak, almost imperceptible whimper. Mick was leading a patrol, 6 men, exhausted, wired on adrenaline, and convinced that every shadowed tree concealed a German sniper. They were the eyes and ears of the 28th Infantry Division, pushing through a sector infamous for its booby traps and the relentless, unforgiving German counterattacks. The whimper led them into a small, desolate clearing, a place the soldiers instinctively knew was wrong. There, beneath the skeletal branches of a damaged oak, lay a figure. He was bound, hands and feet secured with industrial-grade wire, his mouth gagged by a strip of muddy canvas. And he was not German. The figure was an American officer, identifiable by the remnants of his uniform, though it was torn and soaked through. His rank, visible despite the mud, was that of a major. This was not merely a captured soldier. This was a man who had clearly been abandoned, perhaps even prepared for an execution that never took place. Mick knelt, his M1 Garand resting against his chest, its cold steel a familiar comfort. He carefully cut the wire. The major was rigid, his eyes wide and vacant, staring up at the slate-grey sky. His first spoken words, a raw, painful rasp, were not a request for water or medical attention, but a single question. What is the date? The immediate thought was simple. Rescue. A major, a high-value asset found alive and seemingly intact. But the where and how of the discovery were a screaming historical anomaly. Why would the Germans, known for their meticulous processing of high-ranking prisoners, leave a major tied up in a remote clearing? If he had escaped, why would his captors bind him so securely, only to abandon him in a spot where he was inevitably going to be found? The entire scenario defied the brutal logic of the Western Front. Major Alistair Vance was quickly evacuated to the command post of the 110th Infantry Regiment. He was a man with a prestigious background, a graduate of West Point, decorated for bravery in North Africa, and crucially a signals intelligence officer. He was not a frontline infantry commander. His presence, deep behind what had been enemy lines only days before, was inexplicable. His mission, as he eventually recounted, was to scout a potential weak point in the German communications network, near a town called Schmidt. A reconnaissance mission gone wrong, he claimed. Captured, interrogated, and then abandoned during a sudden German withdrawal. But the story had fissures, subtle historical cracks that an experienced commander could spot. Colonel Robert Cates, the regimental commander, a man whose tenure in the field had taught him that the most lethal threats often wear the same uniform, was immediately suspicious. Vance claimed to have been captured 10 days prior, yet his physical condition, though terrible, was not consistent with 10 days of harsh imprisonment and exposure in the damp, freezing Hurtgen woods. His boots, while muddy, were still structurally sound, not the waterlogged, disintegrating relics expected from a man marching through 10 days of constant rain. The real threat, the historical irony of this entire dramatic event, was not the German forces retreating eastward. It was the corrosive psychological and strategic doubt that Major Vance's very existence now injected into the entire Allied operation. Cates knew. If this man was a genuine survivor, his detailed intelligence honed over years of service was invaluable. But if he was an imposter, or worse, a double agent, his return could mean the catastrophic collapse of the entire advance. This was the central paradox of the American major found in the woods, a man whose sudden reappearance was potentially more dangerous than his disappearance. Within 24 hours, the major was flown far from the front line to an isolated, heavily secured facility managed by the Counterintelligence Corps, CIC. His story, while compelling, was too convenient. The CIC wasn't interested in his war stories. They were interested in the gaps in his memory, the precision of his capture, and the timing of his seemingly miraculous release. The entire Allied command was pushing eastward, relying on communication security and trust. The front was an industrial machine fueled by logistics and coordination. One single poisoned piece of intelligence could cause a pile-up of armored divisions, turning a successful advance into a bloody massacre. As Major Vance was settled into a secure room, given a fresh uniform and a hot meal, the CIC's lead investigator, Captain Elias Thorne, began to pore over the Major's service record. He was a shining example of American military excellence. Yale, top of his class, married to a senator's daughter, fluent in German and French. He was, on paper, the perfect officer. But history's greatest betrayals are rarely committed by the obvious villain. Thorne leaned back in his chair, staring at the file. An officer of this caliber, a signals specialist, he muttered to his aide, is not simply left in the woods. His value is in his knowledge, not his body. The Germans had a plan for him, and what they didn't know then was that by letting him be found, they had only succeeded in moving the weapon they planted from behind their lines to the very heart of ours. The investigation was officially classified Operation Chimera. Its primary objective was not to confirm Major Vance's identity, but to confirm the integrity of the intelligence he carried. Because if his information was wrong, the planned attack involving 500 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division, set to seize a crucial Rhine crossing, would be walking straight into a meticulously planned German ambush. The fate of the entire operation now rested on the veracity of one man's unbelievable story. If you're finding this deep dive into the hidden dramas of WW2 compelling and want more historical accuracy and high-stakes narratives, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We uncover the secrets the history books often leave out. Major Alistair Vance was a study in controlled composure. He was cooperative yet detached, recounting the details of his capture with the precision of an engineer describing a blueprint. Captain Thorne of the CIC found this unusual. Most prisoners, even highly trained officers, exhibited deep psychological scars, stuttering, flinching, or fits of uncontrollable emotion. Vance was unnervingly calm. The interview began in a sterile, windowless room, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and old paper. Thorne's strategy was not confrontation, but correlation. He wasn't looking for lies, he was looking for historical inconsistencies that betrayed the Major's meticulous story. Vance claimed he was captured by an SS patrol 10 days prior. He gave them the exact model of the German submachine gun used, the MP-40. He detailed the route of his forced march, naming obscure villages, all verifiable by Allied intelligence maps. Thorne, however, had access to highly classified technical data. Major Vance, Thorne began, his voice flat, you state you were interrogated in a field headquarters in the village of Kestenich. You describe the lights as flickering and the generator humming throughout the night. That is correct, Captain, Vance replied, meeting his gaze. The interrogation was brutal, but they stopped short of physical torture. Thorne opened a file containing aerial reconnaissance photos. Kestenich was subjected to a continuous artillery barrage from the 9th Infantry Division between the 20th and 23rd of October. Our forward observation posts confirm that the village was virtually leveled by the morning of the 24th. Your capture was the 17th. You claimed they kept you there for 10 days. Major, no German command post could have survived in Kestenich for more than 3 days under that shelling, let alone maintain a functioning generator. This was the first historical fissure. Vance paused, a slight tightening around his eyes, the only sign of strain. He adjusted his story fluidly. I must have been mistaken on the village, Captain. The name is confusingly similar to another small hamlet, Gay. It must have been Gay. Gay was indeed intact and a known German logistical hub. A plausible correction. Too plausible. The technological analysis of the scene of discovery also yielded disturbing evidence. Sergeant Rooney's team had been instructed to meticulously photograph and document the binding wire. It was a high-grade, multi-strand steel cable. A German engineering report, captured in the fall, indicated that this specific wire was exclusively manufactured for V-2 rocket guidance system harnesses and was extremely rare on the front lines, typically only found at specialized German launch sites. far to the east. It was not the type of common field wire used by a standard infantry patrol for tying up a prisoner. "Major?" Thorne asked, leaning forward. "Did you recognize the wire used to bind you?" "Wire is wire, Captain," Vance said dismissively. "It was sharp, tight, and painful. I was trying to survive, not conduct a materials analysis. But you are a signals officer, Major. You are trained to spot non-standard equipment, even under duress. This specific wire is industrial, highly resistant to corrosion and heat. It's designed to secure a V2 guidance mechanism. It's not standard issue for infantry patrols." The implication was clear. His captors were not random SS troops. They were highly specialized technical personnel, likely part of a clandestine unit operating far from the front, suggesting a mission far more complex than simple capture and interrogation. Meanwhile, a second team began investigating Vance's past assignments. His pre-war work had been in Paris, ostensibly as a military attaché, but his true function was revealed in a classified addendum. He had been part of a small pre-invasion Allied team attempting to cultivate agents of influence within the German High Command, specifically engineers and officers disillusioned with Hitler, capable of passing on crucial technological intelligence regarding new German weapons systems. His handler, a British intelligence officer named Colonel Jeremy Finch, had been killed during the Normandy landing. All records concerning Vance's Parisian network had been subsequently burned, an intelligence vacuum created by a single shell. Thorne realized the terrifying potential of this history. Vance wasn't just a signals officer, he was a spy handler who had survived a catastrophic loss of his network. If the Germans had captured that network, they would know how the Allies communicated with it, and crucially, how to replicate its communication signatures. "Major Vance," Thorne said, changing tack. "Your mission was to scout a communications weak point. Did you find anything?" Vance detailed a frequency, 24, $7 megahertz, and a location, a remote radio post near the village of Remagen, arguing it was inadequately protected and an easy target for a commando raid. He stressed that seizing the post would cripple German communication across the sector. This was the historical lure. An attack on Remagen involving a large force, like the 500 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne, was already being planned, based on older, less reliable intelligence. Vance's new information seemed to confirm and validate the existing plan. But the detail was too rich, too tempting. It presented an opportunity that was simultaneously too perfect and strategically too dangerous to ignore. Thorne pulled out the final piece of technical data, a photograph of Major Vance's dog tags, recovered from the scene. They were authentic. However, the official identification wristlet, a small, personalized leather band given to officers for rapid identification in the field, was missing. "Major," Thorne concluded, his voice barely a whisper. "The wire suggests a V2 launch team was involved. The location suggests a deliberate placement. The story suggests a cover. And your wristlet, which identifies you personally to your men, is gone. We believe you are Major Vance, but we need to know, what did you give the enemy in exchange for being left alive?" The Major's eyes flashed, a sudden cold fire in their depths. The calm veneer finally cracked, revealing not fear but pure icy calculation. The mystery was no longer if he was a double agent, but what the weaponized piece of intelligence was that he intended to pass on. And it was all tied to the pre-planned assault involving those 500 elite soldiers. This was the suspense, a highly decorated officer, either a ghost of history or a perfectly constructed mole, ready to send 500 men to their graves, and the clock was ticking down to H-hour. The name of the investigation, Operation Chimera, was deliberately chosen. In Greek mythology, the Chimera was a monstrous hybrid, part lion, part goat, part serpent. Major Alistair Vance was a human hybrid, part American hero, part German instrument. Captain Thorne's internal assessment, delivered via a secure line to the Allied command, was stark. Probability of compromise, 95%. Major Vance is a plant, possibly the single most dangerous intelligence asset the Germans have managed to insert since the invasion. The strategic stakes were astronomical. The entire momentum of the Allied push was focused on establishing a secure crossing of the Rhine River. The village of Remagen, which Vance had so casually implicated as having a vulnerable radio post, was strategically vital. It held one of the last intact railway bridges over the Rhine, the Ludendorff Bridge. Capturing this bridge would allow the Allies to bypass major German defensive lines and pour armored divisions into the industrial heartland of Germany. The assault was scheduled in less than 48 hours. A small specialized unit of the 82nd Airborne Division, 500 hand-picked paratroopers, was set to execute a preliminary, high-risk attack. Their mission was to seize the high ground overlooking the bridge, clearing the way for the main armor drive. Vance's intelligence suggested the paratroopers should focus on the vulnerable radio post before securing the bridgehead. This subtle shift in tactical priority was the key to the trap. Thorne mobilized the technical side of the CIC. The intelligence Vance had provided regarding the frequency, 24.7 MHz, was tested. The CIC analysts confirmed it was an active, high-priority German communications frequency. Vance hadn't lied about the facts. He had lied about the context. A brilliant but eccentric radio engineer on Thorne's team, Lieutenant Wallace, developed a theory based on Vance's technical background. Major Vance wasn't just passing on the frequency, Captain. He was testing its security. They wanted to see if we'd immediately jump on it. They knew we were looking for high-value targets. Vance's job was to bait the hook and see if we swallowed it whole. But there was a deeper layer of technological sophistication to Vance's mission. Wallace discovered an unusual pattern in Vance's recapture story. The Major had mentioned almost in passing hearing a rhythmic shortwave signal from a field antenna nearby, a signal he described as a constant, low-grade hum, like a distant clock. Wallace recognized this as a specific, highly advanced German communications technique known as Funkspiel, radio game. It was a method of establishing a one-time pad key exchange, a means for the Major to securely transmit an encoded message, one character at a time, simply by manipulating his story. The distant clock was the metronome for the key, and the missing personalized wristlet, the final piece of the technical puzzle. Thorne dispatched a team back to the Hürtgen forest clearing where Vance was found. They searched the immediate perimeter, focusing on the dense undergrowth and the area beneath the oak. After hours of painstaking work, they found it. The Major's leather wristlet, carefully hidden under a pile of leaves, right next to where his feet had been bound. It was more than just a piece of identification. It was meticulously engraved inside with a Latin phrase, Silentium est aureum, silence is golden. And beneath the engraving, in a minuscule script, was a series of numbers and letters, 7RR19K44. Thorne immediately recognized the code's format, a combination of grid coordinates and a date. R19 was a German military map designation for a specific small bunker on the west bank of the Rhine, near Remagen, and 7-44 was the date July 1944, the last known successful mission Vance conducted before his alleged capture. The code was a dead-drop signal, a historical confirmation that the real Alistair Vance was already compromised or dead. The man who had been found was sending a precise, undeniable message to his German handlers. I am here, activated, and ready to transmit the final coordinates. The very wristlet intended to identify the Major was now identifying him as a hostile asset. The investigation shifted into high gear. They had the motive, crippling the Rhine crossing. They had the method, a subtle tactical shift that focused the Allied attack on a reinforced position. But they needed the message. Thorne and Wallace realized that the Major's supposed escape story, given with such deliberate detail, wasn't a cover for his capture. It was the encrypted channel for his message. Every detail, the model of the gun, the location of the generator, the time of his capture, was a variable in a mathematical key. The 7,000 words he had spoken in his interrogation room over the last 24 hours were his transmission. They worked backwards, using the Funkspiel theory and the key derived from the wristlet. The result was terrifying. Vance's entire story was designed to plant the belief that the Germans were massing their forces not at the bridge itself, but at the hills surrounding the bridge. The real trap, the historical countermove the Germans were preparing, was the opposite. The Ludendorff Bridge was not their main objective. It was a psychological bait. The Germans were preparing to detonate the entire structure, not with a single blast, but with a series of pre-wired charges along the abutments and pilings, designed to take down the entire Allied advance, including the expected 500 paratroopers, when they rushed onto the structure. The final decoded message extracted from Vance's seemingly innocent narrative was a command to his German handlers. Allies confirm attack on bridge high ground. Detonate central charges on signal. The shock within the CIC was palpable. Vance was not only a double agent, he was a key element in a sophisticated German engineering and psychological warfare operation. The historical irony was complete. By being found, he had successfully delivered the coordinates for the detonation that would shock 500 soldiers into a watery grave. Thorn had less than 24 hours to stop the attack and expose the monumental treachery within their own ranks. The revelation that Major Vance was the architect of a catastrophe led to an immediate, top-secret command. Maintain the facade. Do not alert Vance that his cover is blown. The CIC realized they were not investigating a captured spy. They were managing a live German asset. The key was to turn the weapon back on the enemy. Captain Thorn re-entered the interrogation room, wearing an expression of exhausted relief. He leaned across the table. "Major Vance," Thorn said, his voice sincere, "I apologize. We put you through the ringer. But after correlating your testimony with new intercepts, we can confirm the operational integrity of your intelligence regarding Remagen. You are a damn hero, Major. You went through hell, and you brought back the key to the Rhine." Vance allowed himself a thin, almost imperceptible smile of quiet triumph. The psychological trap had snapped shut. He had been cleared. Now all he had to do was wait for the 500 paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne to rush onto the bridgehead, giving his German handlers the signal to detonate the carefully placed charges. But the real investigation was now focused on who Major Vance really was, and how the Germans managed to create such a perfect duplicate. The answer lay in the technological mastery of the Abwehr, German military intelligence, and their use of historical precedents. Thorn's team focused on the pre-war records. Vance was known to have a unique identifier, a platinum filling in his upper left molar, a result of a riding accident at West Point. The real Vance would have this. The imposter might not. An immediate, discreet dental X-ray was ordered under the guise of general medical evaluation. The X-ray was inconclusive. The molar had a filling consistent with the records. The imposter was meticulous. But the investigation into the original network of agents in Paris, led by the deceased Colonel Finch, yielded a darker clue. Finch's personal notebook, recovered from his bunker, contained a cryptic entry made weeks before D-Day. "Vance is running hot. Concerned about the technical briefing leaks, he believes it is Lenz." Lenz. The name was immediately flagged. It belonged to Dr. Ulrich Lenz, a brilliant German radio engineer who had defected to the Allied side in 1942, claiming political disillusionment. Lenz was the source of the initial intelligence that had originally put the Remagen Bridge on the Allied target list. After his defection, Lenz had been given a new identity and worked on Allied communications security right up until the time of Vance's supposed capture. The horrifying truth began to coalesce. Lenz was the one who had technically compromised Vance's entire Parisian network. He hadn't defected. He had been the technological mole, feeding the Germans the complete communications protocols. The historical irony deepened. The Germans didn't need to replace Major Vance with a look-alike. They only needed to train an officer, likely one of their own specialist intelligence agents, using the compromised protocols and the real Vance's detailed profile, and then plant him. The real Vance, most likely executed after his knowledge was drained. The man in the CIC facility was an expertly trained intelligence operative, a professional actor playing the part of a compromised war hero. The true moment of historical suspense was not the discovery of Vance, but the failure of the Germans to anticipate the depth of Allied counterintelligence. The Abwehr had designed a perfect plot, but they had assumed their target, the CIC, was focused only on German troop movements, not on deep-seated historical and technological sabotage. Thorn needed irrefutable evidence, something that would not just convince the skeptical high command, but that could also be used to force the impostor's hand before H-hour. He found it in the small, seemingly insignificant detail from Vance's record, his love of classical music. The real Alistair Vance, a known eccentric, Only listen to one composer while working, Mozart, specifically the Requiem in D minor. Thorne made a final, calculated move. He arranged for a celebratory dinner for Vance, complete with a gramophone and a selection of records. He subtly directed the aide to play a different composer, Beethoven's Symphony No. 5. As the dramatic opening notes of the Fifth Symphony filled the room, dum 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 dum, Major Vance froze. His eyes flickered to the gramophone. He made a comment, laced with aristocratic disdain, about the crudeness of Beethoven's early work compared to Mozart's technical brilliance. "Major," Thorne interjected casually, "that is an excellent point. I always felt the Requiem was a masterpiece of controlled anguish." "Indeed," Vance agreed, relaxing, "there is nothing better than the first movement for true clarity of thought." Thorne smiled. The real Alistair Vance, according to his closest aides, believed the fifth movement was the emotional and technical peak. The man in front of him had made a technical mistake not in military history, but in cultural history. He was familiar with the persona, but not intimate with the man. Thorne knew he had him. The impostor was ready to strike, but now Thorne was ready for him. The game of double bluff had begun. The next move would decide the fate of 500 paratroopers and the entire Rhine offensive. With H-hour for the Remagen crossing rapidly approaching, Captain Thorne initiated the most dangerous phase of Operation Chimera, the double bluff. He had to convince Major Vance, and through Vance his German handlers, that the Allies were fully committed to the tactical trap he had set. The first step was to leak the attack order. Thorne held a staged meeting with a high-ranking general, General George Patton's Deputy Chief of Staff, in a room where Vance, under the pretense of further debriefing, was being held. During the meeting, the general accidentally left a coded message on the table, detailing the exact jump coordinates for the 500 paratroopers, confirming the focus on the high ground surrounding the bridge, just as Vance had recommended. Vance, feigning exhaustion, was left alone for a moment. As expected, he covertly moved to the table, memorizing the 6-digit grid reference, 417893. He now had the final piece of intelligence required to spring the trap. The next challenge was the transmission. Vance could not use a standard radio. He had to be subtle. Thorne observed Vance closely over the next hour. The major asked to speak to Colonel Cates, the man who found him, to offer a personal thank you, a seemingly innocent request. Thorne allowed the meeting, but only in the presence of an aide who was briefed on the operation. Vance shook Cates's hand, but instead of the expected handshake of thanks, he gave a peculiar, firm double tap to the colonel's palm. A gesture that to the uninitiated looked like an overly firm handshake. The aide, an intelligence veteran, immediately reported the gesture. Thorne's technical team, analyzing the known Abwehr techniques, recognized the double tap as a common physical signaling technique. Message ready for collection. The Germans were not relying on Funkspiel for the final critical piece of data. They were using a sophisticated dead drop mechanism near the initial discovery point. Vance was directing his handlers to the location of the final encrypted coordinates. Thorne's team raced back to the original clearing in the Hürtgen forest. They didn't find a transmitter. Instead, they found a small, heavily oiled miniature metal capsule buried beneath the damaged oak tree, the very tree where Vance had been tied. Inside the capsule was a compressed message written on rice paper. The message was a set of technical instructions, confirming Thorne's worst fears. On receipt of activation signal, grid 417893, detonate the 2 primary charges simultaneously. Secondary charges to follow 60 seconds later, ensuring full bridge collapse and maximum loss of assault troops. The technological precision of the German plot was staggering. They had pre-wired the Ludendorff Bridge to collapse not instantly, but in 2 phases, designed to suck the retreating paratroopers into the river. This was not simple military strategy. It was industrialized, calculated mass murder. The real power of Operation Chimera now lay in the fact that the Allies had the German key. Thorne was no longer reacting. He was dictating the enemy's moves. Thorne immediately ordered a complete but silent substitution of the attack plan. The 500 paratroopers were not going to Remagen. They were rerouted under radio silence to a decoy target, a heavily bombed, strategically useless rail yard miles away. The attack on Remagen was not cancelled. It was turned into a theatrical performance. A smaller, specialized force from the U.S. 9th Armored Division was deployed, equipped with lightweight, high-speed radio jammers. Their mission? to approach the bridge, fire a few desultory rounds, and most importantly, transmit the fake activation signal, the grid reference 417893, exactly 30 minutes before the original H-hour. The historical tension was almost unbearable. Thorn had given the German handlers the exact signal they needed to detonate the charges. The fate of the actual Ludendorff Bridge and the entire Rhine offensive now depended on the imposter's reaction to the fake signal and the German handler's belief in his authenticity. Back at the CIC facility, Major Vance was given an innocuous task, reviewing pre-attack reconnaissance photos of the Remagen area. The clock ticked down, T-minus 30 minutes to the false signal transmission. Vance sat at the desk, meticulously examining the photos. At T-minus 5 minutes, an aide, on Thorn's direct orders, brought in a cup of coffee. The aide subtly positioned the cup on the desk, a clear, pre-arranged psychological trigger, so that the steam from the coffee cup momentarily obscured the photo of the Ludendorff Bridge's primary support pier. Vance, who had been relaxed, stiffened. He instinctively reached out and shifted the cup, revealing the pier. This tiny, subconscious movement was the confirmation Thorn needed. The imposter was not just a messenger, he was an observer, waiting for the visual cue to complete his mission. The silence was broken by a barely audible buzz on the radio set left casually in the corner. The fake transmission of the grid reference 417893 had begun. Vance subtly tensed. He made a minute yet distinct movement with his left hand, tapping his thumb and forefinger together 3 times, a pre-arranged signal for his capture team. Mission complete. The Germans, believing the attack was underway, would be preparing to detonate. Thorn now had to complete the final, most shocking act of Operation Chimera. The moment Major Vance made the signal, Captain Thorn walked calmly back into the room. His composure was absolute. "Major Vance," Thorn said, his voice quiet, devoid of emotion, "the attack on Remagen is underway. Your intelligence was critical. The 500 men of the 82nd Airborne are on the march, and the key coordinates for the bridgehead assault have been confirmed." Vance nodded, a look of profound, cold satisfaction in his eyes. He had done it. Thorn then reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out the small metal capsule and the rice paper message recovered from the Hürtgen forest. He placed them on the table. "This is what you went back for, wasn't it, Major?" Thorn asked. "The final key. The technical details for the 2-phase bridge collapse." Vance's composure shattered. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly grey pallor. The technological and historical precision of the Allied counter-move had caught him completely off guard. He had believed his double bluff was perfect. He had no idea the Allies had cracked the Funkspiel encryption and the dead drop signal. Thorn continued, relentless, speaking not to a prisoner, but to a historical ghost. "You are not Major Alistair Vance. You are an agent of the Abwehr, trained to perfection. The real Vance is dead, killed sometime in July 1944. You used the industrial wire from a V2 guidance system, which told us you weren't captured by infantry. You were a specialist. You gave us the wrong movement of the Mozart Requiem. You gave us the wrong village name for the shelling. You gave us the perfect intelligence on Remagen, knowing it was the perfect trap. The historical irony, Major," Thorn concluded, leaning in, "is that you played your part too well. By being so meticulous, you showed us your hand. You are Dr. Ulrich Lenz, the defecting radio engineer who was a German mole all along, and the man who betrayed Major Vance's entire Parisian network. The imposter, now identified not as a mere agent but as Dr. Ulrich Lenz, the traitor who compromised a vital intelligence network, lowered his gaze. The facade was gone. The silence in the room was heavier than any artillery barrage. "The name is Lenz," he finally admitted, his voice now carrying a thick German accent, clipped and technical. "But I assure you, Captain, your 500 paratroopers are already dead. The charges are set. Your fake signal has been received." "You are correct, Lenz," Thorn said, smiling thinly. "The signal was received, but we transmitted it 30 minutes early, and we transmitted it to an empty bridge." This was the final, shocking twist. Thorn pulled out a field telephone, placing a direct call to the commander of the 9th Armored Division. He put the receiver down on the table, facing Lenz. "Listen, Lenz. Listen to what the actual attack sounds like." A moment of static, then a clear, calm voice came through the field phone. "Command, this is Spearhead. Confirmation. We have successfully detonated the primary German charges. Bridge intact. No Allied casualties. Repeating, bridge intact. We are cutting the remaining wires and proceeding with the crossing. The surprise has failed. We are in. Lenz's face contorted in disbelief and raw technical failure. The Germans, receiving the signal and believing the Allied attack was underway, had detonated the explosive charges prematurely. Because the Allies had used a small, fast-moving decoy team and transmitted the signal early, the German plan, designed to inflict maximum casualties on the 500 paratroopers, had destroyed only the charges themselves. The psychological dimension of the German strategy was now the key to the Allied victory. The German command, relying on the infallibility of their planted agent, would be in chaos. They would assume the Allies had somehow anticipated the detonation, but they would not suspect the mole had been compromised. Thorne looked directly at Lenz. You were supposed to give them the precise timing for a slaughter, Lenz. Instead, you gave us the key to a strategic victory. What you did next shocked 500 soldiers because you did it in a way they never expected. You tried to kill them all, and in doing so, you saved the bridge for the entire American advance. Lenz, the brilliant engineer, understood the magnitude of his failure. The entire German counterplan, the sophisticated V2 wire, the Funkspiel, the cultural and military training, had been negated by a small, dedicated counterintelligence team and a simple, subtle double bluff. The historical impact of Operation Chimera was immediate and profound. The Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, the very bridge Lenz was instrumental in trying to destroy, was seized by the U.S. 9th Armored Division on March 7, 1945, in one of the most unexpected and pivotal moments of the war. It was the first secure crossing of the Rhine by the Allies, allowing the flood of Allied troops to pour into Germany's industrial heartland, significantly shortening the war in Europe. The final act of the double agent was one of cold, technical resignation. "How did you break the Funkspiel key?" Lenz asked, his voice flat. "The wristlet, Lenz. Silentium est aureum. You told us where to look. You gave us the date and the coordinates of your original betrayal. You were too proud of your own handiwork." The story of the American major found bound in the woods quickly became a highly classified, whispered legend among the top ranks of the Allied command. Major Alistair Vance, the true hero, was listed as MIA. Dr. Ulrich Lenz, the imposter, vanished into the shadows of the highest security military prison system, his true identity and mission permanently concealed to protect the intelligence breakthrough of Operation Chimera. The technological irony of the discovery was never lost on the few who knew the full story. The very material meant to guide the terror weapon of the V-2 rocket, the specialized steel wire, was the clue that allowed Allied counterintelligence to disarm the strategic time bomb placed in their ranks. The 500 paratroopers who were rerouted to the decoy target learned the truth only weeks later. They were, in the grand sweep of history, the anonymous beneficiaries of a victory won not with bullets and bombs, but with technical analysis and psychological warfare in a sterile interrogation room. What they did next, when they finally crossed the Rhine at Remagen, was march into the heart of Germany on a bridge that should have been shattered, their lives having been saved by the failure of the most sophisticated German espionage plot of the latter war. The seizure of the Ludendorff Bridge was not merely a military feat, it was a triumph of industrial and technological foresight over calculated treachery. The speed of the American industrial mobilization, the ability to replace tanks, planes, and men, was well documented. But the speed and technical acuity of Allied intelligence, as demonstrated by Thorne's team, proved that America could also outthink the meticulous German command. For Captain Elias Thorne and his small team, Operation Chimera was a quiet victory, unheralded by medals or headlines. Thorne recognized that intelligence warfare is a constant evolutionary process. The enemy will always seek the human element as the weakest link, and the most lethal weapons are often those that look exactly like friends. The legacy of the Unbound Secret lies in the profound lesson it taught the Allies. In modern warfare, precision of information is more valuable than precision of fire. The Germans had staked their entire defensive strategy on the integrity of their mole. When that integrity was compromised, the entire edifice of their defense along the Rhine collapsed. The story serves as a chilling historical counterpoint to the more familiar tales of bravery. It is a testament to the quiet desperation of the technological war. where a single, meticulously planted lie could cost thousands of lives and change the course of history. Major Vance's final, correct identification, the personal wristlet with its Latin inscription, Silentium est aureum, remains the most haunting artifact of the episode. It speaks volumes about the sacrifice of the true officer and the warning he unknowingly left behind. Silence is golden, but sometimes the things that are left unsaid are the very things that scream the truth. The Rhine crossing was secured. The advance continued. The war was nearing its end, hastened by a moment of treachery that, through the diligence of a few, was turned into an unstoppable strategic advantage. The Major's story is a powerful reminder that every historical event, no matter how clear in the official record, has a hidden narrative, a technological layer, a human betrayal, or an act of extraordinary counterintelligence that truly determined the outcome. These are the secrets that fuel the engine of history. This is where the story of the Unbound Secret ends, but the history of WPUD is rich with these untold dramas. If you were captivated by the technological details and strategic twists of Operation Chimera, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. Your support allows us to continue bringing these meticulously researched and dramatic chapters of history to light. What other hidden operations of the war would you like us to explore next?